I can't even sugarcoat a lead-in on this one because I've tried, trust me. There are a lot of great characters out there right now in comics. Many of them are legacy or spin-off or direct counterpoint characters. The biggest example of this is probably the Spider-Man titles right now. You have the main Peter Parker of the 616, Miles Morales, who's now active in the 616. Miguel O'Hara, I think, made it back to 2099, but he was stuck in the present 616 for a while. You have Superior Spider-Man, Ben Reilly's Scarlet Spider. I have no idea what happened to Kane as Scarlet Spider, so I'm not going to count him, but at the same time, I'm going to count him. You also have the Renew Your Vows, Peter, MJ, and Annie Mae. Then you have Jessica Drew, who's Spider-Woman. Then you have Spider-Gwen, who is technically Spider-Woman, but now she's Ghost Spider after a really good miniseries. There's also Silk, who despite having a really bad introduction to the Spideyverse, seems to be a mainstay. And that's not even going into the scrapped or no longer around Spider people, like Mayday Parker or Aranya, the 616 Spider-Girl, and again, wherever the hell Kane is right now. Then, there's also the last 2 years of having massive Spider events, like Spider-Verse and Spider-Geddon, which brings in a billion other Spider-Persons. If we were going to include Spider-Man spin-offs like Venom, then there's just a lot to go with there. The point of all that is literally that because a character got so popular, obviously Spider-Man's a popular one, there began to be different versions, and even Jessica Drew was solely created because Stan Lee didn't want another company to steal Spider-Woman to ride on that popularity. So instead of dealing with the same headache that Wonder Man and Power Girl caused, they put out their own. Stan brought this all up in 1975, by the way, at a talk to James Madison University. Side note, for anyone who does like insider information and behind-the-scenes stuff, old fanzines like Comics Journal or even Wizards Magazine now are fantastic places to find some surprisingly great character stuff. The reason I want to talk about different saturations actually stems from one of the character-specific Twitter accounts I follow. So I'm technically answering a stolen question and even somewhat starting this whole thing off with the answer from Spider-Woman Daily. Anon asked, do you think that Gwen and, to a lesser extent, Silk have stolen some of Jessica's momentum Marvel Universe? Spider-Woman Daily answered this with, I hate admitting it, especially because I do like Gwen and Cindy, but yes I do. Both Cindy and Gwen appeared right as Jess was going to have her first solo comic after like 30 years. But Gwen and Cindy had really great costumes and stories that grabbed everyone's attention rather than the attention going to Jess. I almost wish they had postponed Jess's solo a bit, as her book was buried under the other two. The thing that really kills me, though, is that Gwen made it to the big screen before Jessica did. SWD's answer is generally the problem with oversaturation of similar characters within a short time without truly having a status quo to hold readers. That does not mean those characters don't deserve attention because, again, Gwen and even Cindy now, I really like. Because in rapid-fire succession like that, so many alternate Spider titles came out, something that was as brilliant as Dennis Hopeless's run on Spider-Woman, which I do have a rambling video about why I like it on this channel, had a quick pop, and then no one gave a damn because 5 minutes later, the next new hotness came out. Now, before I get into the rest of this video, do go and give some love to Spider-Woman Daily, and follow her on Twitter, and then judge me and not the people I steal ideas from. Oh my god, I actually made a smiley emoticon. Oversaturation of a character or team or something like that, a marketing idea, and even art can hurt so many worthwhile books. Spider-Man is the easiest character to use on a character front because of how many books came out in the past 10 years or so that were Spider-related. Oddly enough, it has been since Spider-Man One More Day that happened, and I actually made an article about how that helped him on a meta level, but we're not going to get into that. I'm going to piss people off enough. That basic idea can also be applied to teams, like how Avenger Arena or Avengers Undercover had very little to do with the actual Avengers, or how the last New Avengers book was kind of just a superhero team put together by Roberto da Costa, and not really Avengers at all. When 14 Avengers titles come out, not including solos, less people will remember Secret Avengers with Spider-Woman, Black Widow, and Hawkeye, even if it has great character interaction plus a naked fight scene in a sauna, due to the fact that there is a very specific lineup, and there is enough choices in Avengers titled books that people would rather go for the book that has Thor, Captain America, and Iron Man prominently on the cover. That is also the easiest saturation to understand, quantity saturation. Then there's marketing oversaturation, and this is where Marvel has chilled on this a little bit, But for the past few years, they've come out basically every 3 months with a new, and the 616 will never be the same again. If every event is going to totally change things, then there's no real stakes involved, and your story loses something. The same problem can also be seen with event and event tie-ins. The most famous or infamous example in recent times was the fact that Civil War II tie-ins led to poor sales for books that tied into it, and needing to be tied in with the event killed momentum on other books. Now, I know that there's been a couple articles saying that Civil War II didn't actually lose sales. It did, because there's a difference between individuals who bought the books and the retail speculative buys. Just so I'm not picking on Marvel alone in this, DC also has a nice history of putting out cross-company storylines that kill momentum on books and drop sales. A good example would be Amazon's Attack hurt basically everything it was tied into. Of course, I would be remiss if I didn't bring up this hot-button issue, like marketing buzzwords. Please note, I'm not going to be talking about the politics themselves, but just strictly the oversaturation as it buries other books of a similar tone. The all-woman X-Men book was given a yay woman treatment on its announce, and it got good reviews, and it came with all the perks that putting that tag on it does. But that push only happened until it released, and then the press releases and article writers and everyone else hopped directly onto Fearless Defenders. Or it happened the other way around, I can't remember. Either way, it buried the lead of the other all-woman book. Granted, had they called it X-Women or something like that, it probably would have had more staying power, but even Fearless Defenders got shafted because then Marvel dropped that book like a bad habit to market other titles. Even A-Force, when it came out, they basically buried every other book so they could go, look at this team, it's got the women's, yay! It was a marketing push. But because Marvel went that route, it was rapid-firing these similarly tagged products. Less and less attention was given to the other books that had similar agendas, but didn't taught it on the tin like that. Again, I'm not saying that any of these books are bad. In fact, Fearless Defenders is arguably the best out of the three I just mentioned, but very few people even bring it up unless it's in favor of an argument they're in, and just more people need to read that goddamn book. Something similar happens with character histories due to that oversaturation. Many people forget that Dick Grayson was kind of not a very good Robin, because he was a straightforward character until he left Batman, and then it became an oversaturation of Nightwing, Teen Titans, and much of the materials that reflected on him being a good Robin. There's an odd reversal that also happens to this, in that the popularity of something like Teen Titans, the animated show, completely rewrote the pop culture understanding of the Titans. So there will always be backlash against any media that doesn't fall in line with that, even comics at this point. The third saturation point that really hurts character stories as a whole and all that is something most people actually don't think about on this front. Artwork. I mean, everyone looks at art and goes, yeah, bad art may kill a book. But I'm going to say one name and you'll understand what I mean. Sort of. Robert Liefeld. The name gets spoken and you instantly understand because the comic community has made an official stance that he was a terrible artist. He's like Highlander 2 The Quickening. I mean, I can't not picture that drawing of Cap every time I say his name, even when I'm about to say that he honestly wasn't that bad, all things considered. The funny thing is that the backlash actually started from older readers who preferred the simpler but still vibrant art of the 80s, of the early 80s, early mid-80s. It wasn't truly until the rise of the internet reviewer that Liefeld became the hip name to equate with terrible art. Most people also don't realize that a lot of the art was the standard comics of the time. Even over at DC, you saw that influence. It was the oversaturation of that art that made it a standard and something that people look back on with an eel face painted over the whole era. Another really great example of all this is comic covers themselves. Zenoscope does this a lot, which is having a fairly over-sexualized cover that turns off a lot of new readers, but the comic within doesn't usually reflect the over-sexualized, or at least the writing doesn't reflect the art. It's why many people haven't actually read the best Kate Bishop story not put out by Marvel with the Robin Hood line of comics, particularly the Pat Shand run, which is honestly a must-read. A lesser known, but we all know it, oversaturation also came from the 2000s writing community. I'll embarrass myself on this one as well. The 2000s were a terrible time for up-and-coming writers, or people who wanted to be writers, because we were all in an emo phase. We wanted the poetic death of Sylvia Plath, or the gothic romance that would paint the era, where you'd have a ton of stories written by wannabe writers where the main character was a self-insert anime character who'd always wear black. Double points because every main character had angel wings. This was actually reflected in newcomer writers in the early 2000s, such as Chuck Austin's run of X-Men. I did a video on that. I know I keep pointing to videos, but it gives you a good reference point. That changed with when Joss Whedon went all Nirvana, and suddenly, instead of having this poetic darkness, even though he did add a lot of poetic darkness into his stuff, I mean, Angel as a character is basically what everyone was trying to write themselves to be. It all became quippy snarks and all that. Rather than making an OC to be distant but loving to that girl you actually had a crush on in school, or you getting recruited into an Avengers-like team, and Tiger and Mockingbird deciding that you deserved. I'm ending that sentence there and just saying that Stephenie Meyers is a perfect example of how the female version of this trope really was, and how popular it surprisingly kind of still is. What is always hard to really explain when it comes to any of this is the, well, how would you fix it? Because saturation is a really unique beast. It can be as simple as when you release something, sort of like how Inhumanity as an event lost a lot of traction because Ms. Marvel came out like a couple months before the main story launched, burying the event in the hype train that was the Ms. Marvel train. Or like Spider-Woman Daily said, waiting just a little bit longer to release something could have let people latch onto the story being told for Jessica Drew if it wasn't, the first one out the gate. However, other times, like marketing the current trends of politics, becomes so much of the norm that without it, you can have people feel that if they're not being spoon-fed which one is the air-quote correct book to buy, it means the publisher isn't actually doing anything on that political front. Ultimately, though, there is no right answer, except for what you feel on a personal level. If you like Clint Barton, then the oversaturation of Kate Bishop and sometimes direct character assassination is a huge negative and can lead you to wanting that to end, making the right answer for you, just make another Matt Fraction Clint Barton book. The fact that there are no right answers when it comes to something that's an opinion-based, this leads to headbutting between differing opinions, which is never a good thing. So I'd love to hear your opinions, dearest Inklings. If you agree, disagree, or just want to add your 2 cents, then leave a comment below. While you're down there, if there's a topic or comic you'd like to see on any of our shows, or just done in this vlog-esque style, let me know. Like us on Facebook and follow me on Twitter, where we have contests and giveaways going on right now to earn some free comics. We also have a Patreon where you can buy our souls for a video or two, or just give us a buck and tell us